She thought one bowl of soup would save a life. Instead, it signed her death warrant, or so it seemed. Magnolia Sterling stood on the marble steps of her father's imposing mansion, watching wisps of smoke stain the distant azure hills. The bespoke silk dress she wore, a testament to her family's wealth, felt heavy, almost mocking, as her hands trembled, cradling a simple wooden bowl filled with steaming broth. Across the meticulously manicured courtyard, a man lay sprawled against the ornate stone fountain, his sun-weathered skin marred by raw, bleeding wounds, his breath shallow and ragged. She had discovered him at dawn, a fallen figure of defiance amidst her father's opulence, his worn leather clothing marking him as one of the native tribes her father routinely denigrated. Every ingrained instinct, every whispered warning from her upbringing screamed at her to summon the ranch hands, to have him dragged away like refuse before Clayton Sterling discovered this trespasser on his precious land. But something in the stranger's eyes, a fleeting spark of defiance burning beneath the agony, stayed her hand. The mansion looming behind her represented the fruits of her father's relentless ambition, a tangible legacy built upon decades of ruthless expansion and often questionable dealings. Room after room overflowed with imported furniture, shimmering crystal chandeliers, and grandiose oil paintings that depicted a romanticized world, a world utterly detached from the harsh realities she glimpsed beyond the manicured gardens. Yet here, in this stark moment, all that ostentatious luxury felt hollow, an unbearable weight compared to the simple human act of offering sustenance to someone in desperate need. Magnolia knelt beside the wounded man, her expensive dress pooling in the dusty earth. Ignoring her mother's phantom lectures on proper deportment, she focused on the stranger's face as his eyes fluttered open, a mixture of surprise and profound weariness clouding their depths. When she cautiously extended the bowl, his calloused hands, trembling with exhaustion and pain, reached out and gratefully accepted it. He drank deeply, the warm broth seemingly injecting a flicker of life back into his ravaged frame. For a fleeting moment, relief washed over his features, but as he handed the empty bowl back to her, his expression shifted, becoming an intricate tapestry of emotions she couldn't fully decipher. Gratitude intertwined with a profound, almost sorrowful pity. "You don't know what you've done," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper carried on the morning breeze. Before Magnolia could press him for an explanation, the unmistakable thunder of approaching hoofbeats echoed across the courtyard, shattering the fragile stillness. Her father's booming voice, usually a comforting sound, now resonated with menace, growing louder with each passing second as he approached from the direction of the stables. The stranger struggled to his feet, his movements betraying the agony he must have been enduring, yet driven by an undeniable sense of urgency. "They will come for you now," he warned, backing slowly towards the dense tree line that marked the boundary of the property. "Because of what you've shown me, because of what you represent, they will come." The hoofbeats intensified, drumming a frantic rhythm against the earth. Magnolia realized with a surge of dread that her father was about to discover her act of defiance, her perceived betrayal of his deeply ingrained prejudices. But it was the stranger's final words, spoken just before he melted into the shadows of the trees, that truly chilled her to the bone, etching themselves into her memory with the permanence of a brand. "Tell your father that Ayana of the Wind River people remembers this kindness, and tell him that 200 of my brothers remember his cruelty. Tell him the debt is long overdue." Clayton Sterling's polished boots struck the marble steps with the force of hammer blows as he stormed towards his daughter, his weathered face, a testament to years of relentless struggle and often ruthless ambition across the unforgiving territory, contorted with barely suppressed fury. The sight of the empty wooden bowl clutched in Magnolia's trembling hands seemed to ignite his rage further, the silver spurs on his custom-made boots jangling with each aggressive step, a chilling prelude to the eruption of violence she had witnessed far too many times throughout her sheltered life. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the morning air like a honed blade, silencing the birdsong and casting a long shadow of fear across the courtyard. Magnolia's throat constricted, suddenly dry and scratchy. Her father stood before her now, a formidable figure of raw power and controlled rage, radiating an aura that had been known to send grown men scurrying for cover. The expensive fabric of his tailored coat couldn't mask the predatory instinct that lay beneath, the cunning and ruthlessness of the man who had carved out an empire by taking what others had claimed as their own, often through intimidation and outright force. "I was feeding the horses," she stammered, the lie feeling like a bitter poison on her tongue, a betrayal of her own conscience. Clayton's eyes narrowed, scanning the courtyard with the predatory gaze of a hawk searching for its prey. His gaze lingered, hardening on the dark stains marring the pristine stone near the fountain, remnants of Ayana's blood, already drying in the relentless sun. When he turned his attention back to his daughter, the initial fiery anger had been replaced by something far more unsettling, a cold, calculating glint that sent shivers down Magnolia's spine. "Horses don't bleed like that," he said quietly, his voice deceptively calm as he knelt, touching the dark stains with a gloved finger. He rose slowly, his finger now stained crimson. "Tell me what happened here, Magnolia, and tell me the truth." The weight of his intense stare bore down on her, shrinking her back into the frightened child who had been caught stealing sweets from the kitchen. But this was different, far more dangerous than any childhood transgression. She could feel it in the casual way his hand rested on the pearl grip of his ivory-handled pistol, in the rigid set of his jaw, a silent declaration that someone, somewhere, was about to pay a terrible price. "There was a man," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was hurt, dying maybe. I gave him some broth from the kitchen." Clayton's face drained of color, transforming from red to white in a terrifying display of suppressed rage. For a moment he stood motionless, processing her words, the gears of his mind visibly grinding as he assessed the implications of her actions. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, menacing rumble, barely above a whisper. "Describe him." Magnolia's hands trembled uncontrollably as she conjured Ayana's face in her mind's eye, the striking high cheekbones, the intricate beadwork painstakingly sewn onto his torn leather clothing, the haunted depths of his dark eyes that had held both profound gratitude and a chilling warning. He was one of the natives from the tribes up north. I think he said his name was Ayana. The remaining color completely vanished from Clayton's face, leaving him looking ashen and gaunt. He took a hesitant step backward, his hand instinctively moving to his concealed weapon. Around the courtyard, the ranch hands who had been going about their morning chores abruptly ceased their activities, sensing the palpable shift in their boss's demeanor, the gathering storm brewing within him. "Ayana?" Clayton repeated the name, the word coming out like a curse, a venomous expletive spat from his lips. "Sweet Mother of God, Magnolia, do you have any idea what you've done?" Before she could formulate a reply, a sound, a primal vibration that resonated deep within the earth, drifted across the valley, causing every living being on the property to freeze in place. It began as a low, distant rumble, like the faint echo of thunder on the far horizon, but as it rapidly grew closer, it became unmistakable. The rhythmic, earth-shattering pounding of dozens upon dozens of horses approaching at a full gallop. The thunderous hoofbeats grew louder with each passing second, shaking the ground beneath their feet, and Clayton's face underwent a horrifying transformation into something Magnolia had never witnessed before, a raw, unfiltered expression of pure, unadulterated fear. This was the man who had stared down claim jumpers and cattle rustlers without flinching, the man who had amassed his fortune by intimidating anyone who dared to stand in his path. Yet now his hands trembled violently as he gripped her shoulders with bruising force. "Get inside," he commanded, his voice cracking with a terror she had never imagined he was capable of feeling. "Lock the doors, don't come out no matter what you hear." "Father, what's happening?" Magnolia tried to pull away from his grasp, but his grip tightened like a vice. "What's happening is that you just fed the one man in this entire territory who has more reason to hate me than anyone alive." Clayton's eyes darted nervously towards the approaching sound, his mind racing as he desperately tried to assess the impending threat. "Ayana isn't just any warrior, Magnolia. He's the son of Chief Takakota, and 3 months ago—" He trailed off, stopping himself abruptly, but the damage had already been done. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air, pregnant with unspoken horror. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together in Magnolia's mind with sickening clarity, forming a grotesque tableau she had always subconsciously avoided. the surreptitious newspaper clippings she had seen her father burning in his study fireplace, the hushed, conspiratorial conversations between him and his foreman that always ceased abruptly whenever she entered a room, the sudden influx of armed men he had hired to patrol the property, transforming their once peaceful ranch into an armed fortress. "What did you do 3 months ago?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a premonition of impending doom. Clayton released her shoulders as if her touch had suddenly become toxic, turning towards the main gate where a thick cloud of dust billowed on the horizon, signaling the imminent arrival of the approaching horde. "I did what I had to do to protect our land," he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction, sounding hollow and defensive even to his own ears. "Chief Takakota's people were illegally camping by the river that runs through our property. They claimed it was sacred ground, said their ancestors were buried there. The hoofbeats were deafening now, close enough that individual horses could be distinguished, their riders clearly visible through the swirling dust. Magnolia estimated at least 20, maybe 30 riders approaching at breakneck speed, but Clayton seemed oblivious to the immediate danger, lost in his forced confession. "They wouldn't leave," he continued, his voice barely audible above the encroaching thunder. "So I hired men from town, professional men. We told them to clear the camp while the warriors were away hunting." Magnolia's stomach lurched violently, nausea rising in her throat as the full horror of his actions began to crystallize. "Father, no! There were women there, children!" "We thought they would just scatter, find somewhere else to go." Clayton's hands were shaking uncontrollably now, betraying the carefully cultivated image of stoic invincibility he had always projected. But some of them fought back, and when Ayana returned with the hunting party and found what had happened, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The unspeakable horror of it painted itself across Magnolia's imagination, a chilling vision of a son returning home to find his family slaughtered, his sacred ground desecrated, his entire world irrevocably destroyed by the very man who now stood trembling on his own doorstep. The thunder of horses reached the main gate, and through the swirling morning haze, Magnolia could see them clearly now, not 30 riders, but dozens more, an overwhelming force of retribution. They sat motionless and impassive on their mounts, forming a menacing semicircle that stretched from one end of the property to the other, effectively cutting off any possibility of escape. War paint streaked their faces in terrifying patterns, and an arsenal of weapons glinted menacingly in the morning sun, reflecting the promise of imminent bloodshed. At the center of the assembled warriors, riding a magnificent black stallion that seemed to pulse with barely contained energy, was Ayana. Even from a distance, Magnolia could discern that his wounds had been carefully tended, that he sat ramrod straight and proud despite the pain he must have been enduring. In his hand he held a long, intricately carved spear adorned with feathers that danced and shimmered in the wind, a symbol of his leadership and unwavering resolve. "How many?" Clayton whispered to himself, his voice cracking with fear as he desperately tried to count the assembled riders. But Magnolia had already tallied them. Just as Ayana had vowed, there were exactly 200 warriors surrounding her father's mansion, and every single one of them was staring directly at her. A profound silence fell over the valley, a silence so complete and unnerving that it was far more terrifying than any war cry could ever be. 200 warriors sat motionless on their horses, their unwavering gaze fixed on the mansion with the intensity of predators studying their prey, their collective will in almost tangible force. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of the wind through the ancient cottonwood trees and the nervous snorting of the horses, sensing the palpable tension in the air. Ayana raised his spear high above his head, the feathers catching the morning light like a beacon of defiance, and every warrior behind him mirrored his action in perfect synchronicity. The sight of those gleaming weapons, raised in silent unison, sent Clayton stumbling backward towards the house, dragging Magnolia with him. "Inside now," he hissed, his voice laced with desperation, but his daughter planted her feet firmly on the marble steps, refusing to be moved. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "This is because of what I did. I need to face it. Clayton's ranch hands had cautiously emerged from the bunkhouse and stables, clutching rifles in their trembling hands. But they looked pitifully outnumbered, a mere 15 men against an overwhelming force of 200 hardened warriors. Even the bravest among them seemed to understand the futility of their situation, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and resignation. Ayanna gently nudged his stallion forward, separating himself from the ranks of his warriors. As he approached, Magnolia could see that someone had meticulously cleaned and bandaged his wounds, and fresh war paint now adorned his face in intricate patterns she didn't recognize, each stroke telling a silent story of grief, anger, and a thirst for vengeance. But his eyes remained the same, intelligent, pained, and now filled with an unsettling mixture of resignation and grim determination. He stopped his horse 20 feet from the mansion steps, his gaze unwavering as he addressed the man who had brought so much pain and suffering to his people. His voice, though calm, carried clearly across the courtyard, echoing with the weight of centuries of injustice. "Clayton Sterling," he called out, his words slicing through the tense silence like a sharpened knife. "You know why I have come." Clayton stepped protectively in front of his daughter, his hand finally drawing his ivory-handled pistol, the motion seeming almost comical given the overwhelming odds stacked against him. "What do you want, Ayanna?" The warrior's gaze shifted, softening slightly as it rested on Magnolia. "Your daughter showed me kindness when I was dying," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of gratitude. "She gave me food and water without knowing who I was or what I represented. For this act of selfless humanity, I offer you a choice." Clayton's grip tightened on his weapon, his knuckles turning white. "What choice?" Ayanna gestured towards the assembled warriors behind him, a silent testament to the devastation Clayton had wrought. "Each of these men lost family in the massacre you ordered. Mothers, wives, children. They have ridden 3 days without rest to be here, seeking the justice that your law will never provide. They crave retribution." Magnolia felt the blood drain from her face as the full weight of her father's crimes washed over her, threatening to overwhelm her. She looked at the faces of the warriors, seeing the raw grief and barely contained rage etched into their features, faces that should have been etched with peace and contentment. "The choice is this," Ayanna continued, his eyes moving back to Magnolia. "You can face judgment from my people for what you have done, a swift and brutal justice that will serve as a warning to others. Or—" He paused, his gaze locking with hers, a silent question hanging in the air. "Your daughter can come with us willingly, to live among our people and learn our ways, to understand what was destroyed by your greed. She will become a bridge between our worlds." Clayton's pistol wavered in his trembling hand. "You want to take my daughter hostage?" "Not hostage," Ayanna replied, his voice firm and unwavering. "Teacher, student, a living testament to the possibility of understanding and reconciliation. She would be safe, honored, treated as family, but she would learn the true cost of what happened by the river. She will learn the names of the dead and the stories of those they left behind." He paused, his gaze piercing. "Tell me, Clayton Sterling, if you were Magnolia, what would you do? Stay and watch your father face brutal justice for his heinous crimes, a spectacle that would haunt your dreams forever, or sacrifice your privileged life to save him and learn from the people he destroyed, becoming a force for change, a beacon of hope in a world consumed by hatred and violence?" Before her father could utter a word, Magnolia stepped forward, her mind made up, a sense of purpose washing over her. The soft silk of her dress whispered against the cold marble as she descended the steps, each footfall echoing in the deadly silence, a defiant rhythm against the impending storm. Behind her, Clayton's voice cracked, his voice breaking as he called out her name, begging her to reconsider, but she didn't turn around. "I'll go," she said, her voice surprisingly strong and resolute despite the terror that still coursed through her veins. "But I have conditions." A murmur rippled through the assembled warriors, and Ayanna tilted his head slightly, studying her with those dark, knowing eyes that had haunted her since their first encounter. "You are in no position to make demands," one of the warriors called out, his horse prancing impatiently beneath him. eager for the release of pent-up aggression, but Ayanna raised his hand, silencing his brother with a mere gesture. "Speak," he said simply, his gaze unwavering. Magnolia's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to meet his intense gaze, refusing to back down. "My father lives unharmed. You take me and you leave him to face whatever justice the territorial courts decide, not the justice of war, not the blind retribution of vengeance." "Magnolia, no!" Clayton's voice broke completely now, a sound of utter despair. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for my mistakes. I won't let you carry the burden of my sins." She turned to look at him then, this man who had built an empire on the bones of other people's dreams, this man who had always seemed invincible, untouchable. His face was streaked with tears she had never seen him shed, and for the first time in her life he looked like what he truly was, a broken old man, finally forced to confront the devastating consequences of his choices. "It's not a sacrifice, Father," she said quietly, her voice filled with a newfound strength and resolve. "It's justice, the kind you should have sought long before you ordered the killing of innocents. It's the price I'm willing to pay for your redemption." Ayanna dismounted from his stallion with a grace that belied his injuries and walked towards her, stopping just close enough that she could see the intricate beadwork on his worn leather vest, the careful patterns that spoke of a rich artistry her world had tried to suppress, a culture her father had attempted to eradicate. When he spoke, his voice was so soft that only she could hear him. "Do you understand what you are choosing?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for any sign of wavering. "My people's way of life is not your father's mansion. There is no silk, no crystal, no servants to attend your every whim. There is only the land, the seasons, and the unbreakable bonds between people who have learned to survive together, to rely on each other in the face of unimaginable hardship." Magnolia nodded slowly, though her throat felt tight with unshed tears. A lump of fear and uncertainty lodged in her chest. "I understand, but I also understand that my comfortable, privileged life was built on the graves of your family, on the stolen land that rightfully belongs to your people. Maybe it's time I learned what that really means." Something flickered in Ayanna's expression, surprise perhaps, or a grudging respect for her courage and selflessness. He stepped back and addressed the assembled warriors in their native language, his words flowing like a swift, rushing river. The response was immediate and impassioned, voices raised in what sounded like argument or intense debate. After several tense minutes, Ayanna turned back to her, his face unreadable. "My brothers are not all convinced that your offer is sufficient payment for what was taken from us. Some believe that only blood can answer for blood, that your father's life is the only acceptable retribution." Clayton had moved closer during the tense exchange, his pistol now hanging loosely at his side, his face a mask of grief and regret. "Then take my blood," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but filled with a quiet determination. "I'm the one who gave the orders. I'm the one who should pay the price for my actions." "Father, no." Magnolia spun to face him, her eyes pleading with him to reconsider. "This is my choice to make, and it's my debt to pay." He reached out, cupping her face in his calloused hands, meeting her eyes with something she had rarely seen, a genuine emotion that might have been pride. "For the first time in my life, daughter, let me do something worthy of the woman you've become. Let me atone for my sins, even if it means sacrificing my own life." The tension in the courtyard stretched taut like a bowstring, threatening to snap at any moment. 200 warriors sat silent on their horses, weapons poised, their faces impassive, while father and daughter faced each other across a chasm of years and choices, a gulf of misunderstanding and regret. In the distance, dark storm clouds gathered ominously on the horizon, promising a torrential downpour that would either wash the blood from the stones or further inflame the already volatile situation. Ayanna watched this poignant exchange with the patient wisdom of a man who had learned that some decisions could not be rushed, that the most profound choices required careful consideration and a willingness to accept the consequences. Little did they know that a lone rider was rapidly approaching from the east, carrying news that would shatter everything they thought they understood about justice, revenge, and the true cost of mercy. News that would irrevocably alter the course of their lives. The sound of a galloping horse broke through the tense standoff like a sudden clap of thunder, shattering the heavy silence and causing every head to turn towards the eastern ridge. A lone rider approached at breakneck speed, his horse lathered with sweat and foam, its eyes wide with exertion. Even from a distance, Magnolia could discern that this was no ordinary messenger, no casual traveler. The frantic way he rode, leaning low over his horse's neck, spoke of a desperate urgency, a mission of vital importance. Ayana's warriors shifted restlessly, their hands instinctively moving towards their weapons as the unknown rider drew closer, their suspicions aroused. But Ayana himself remained motionless, his keen eyes fixed on the approaching figure with an expression that suggested a flicker of recognition, a premonition of the devastating news that was about to unfold. The rider was young, perhaps no more than 17 or 18 years old, with the same high cheekbones and sun-weathered skin as the warriors surrounding the mansion. His horse stumbled as he reached the outer circle of the war party, and he practically fell from the saddle in his haste to reach Ayana, his body trembling with exhaustion and fear. He spoke rapidly in their native tongue, his words tumbling over each other in a torrent of barely contained panic. As he spoke, Ayana's face underwent a dramatic transformation, shifting from stoic composure to an expression of profound shock, quickly followed by a growing sense of horror. Clayton stepped closer to his daughter, sensing that whatever news the young rider brought, it would irrevocably alter the dynamics of their precarious situation, tilting the balance of power in an unforeseen direction. "What's he saying?" he whispered urgently, his voice barely audible above the snorting of the horses and the rising wind. Magnolia shook her head, her knowledge of the native tongue limited to a few basic phrases, but she could interpret the body language well enough. The young man kept pointing towards the north, his gestures becoming more frantic and agitated with each passing moment, indicating a situation of dire emergency. Several of the assembled warriors began talking among themselves, their voices rising in what sounded like alarm and disbelief, their faces etched with concern. Ayana held up his hand, silencing the rising clamor with a single gesture of authority, then turned to face Clayton and Magnolia, his expression grave. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there moments before, a somber tone that sent a chill down Magnolia's spine. "There has been another attack," he said, the words falling like heavy stones in still water, disrupting the fragile equilibrium of the courtyard. "A settlement 20 miles north of here. Women and children. All dead." Clayton's face went ashen, his breath catching in his throat. "That's impossible. I gave no such orders. I haven't hired any men since—" "Not your men!" Ayana interrupted, his eyes blazing with renewed fury, his voice laced with barely controlled rage. "White men, yes. But they wore the uniforms of territorial soldiers. They carried the flag of your government, the banner of supposed civilization." The devastating implications hit Magnolia like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her. If territorial forces were conducting their own clandestine campaign of extermination against the native peoples, then her father's crime was just one small part of a much larger, far more insidious pattern of violence and oppression, a systemic injustice that permeated the entire territory. The warriors who had come seeking justice for one isolated massacre now faced the horrifying reality that similar atrocities were occurring even as they stood here, that their families and communities were under constant threat. "My youngest brother was at that settlement," Ayana continued, his voice now steady, but his hands clenched into tight fists, his knuckles bone white. "He was visiting his wife's family, learning to be a father, eagerly anticipating the birth of his first child." He paused, swallowing hard, the pain of his loss radiating from him like a palpable force. When he spoke again, each word was precise and cutting, a testament to the depth of his grief and the simmering rage that threatened to consume him. "The messenger says they found him protecting the children. They shot him 17 times, leaving him lying in the dirt like a discarded animal." The young rider spoke again, even more urgently this time, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate plea, and Magnolia saw several of the warriors beginning to turn their horses away from the mansion, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and determination, their priorities shifting in light of this new crisis. "What is he saying now?" she asked. Though she dreaded the answer, her heart pounding in her chest, Ayana's eyes met hers, and she saw in them a pain so deep and profound that it seemed to have no bottom, a well of sorrow that threatened to overflow. "He says the soldiers are moving south, towards the winter camps, where our elders and our sick take shelter when the weather turns cold," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. The chilling logic was inescapable, the arithmetic of survival brutally simple. 200 warriors were here seeking justice for one man's crime, a long overdue reckoning for past wrongs, while their most vulnerable people faced imminent annihilation from a ruthless enemy they couldn't possibly defend against. "You have to go," Magnolia said quietly, her voice filled with an unspoken understanding, a shared recognition of the greater good. "You have to save them. Your people need you more than I need my vengeance." "Yes," Ayana replied, his gaze unwavering, his jaw tight with determination. "But first, we finish what we came here to do. Justice must be served." Ayana turned back to his warriors and spoke in their native language, his words sharp and commanding, his voice resonating with authority. The response was immediate and explosive, a heated debate erupting among the assembled riders. Voices raised in impassioned argument that needed no translation. Some pointed urgently towards the north, their faces etched with concern for their families. Others gestured angrily at Clayton, demanding retribution for past crimes, and still others looked towards Magnolia with expressions she couldn't decipher, a complex mixture of pity, resentment, and perhaps even a grudging respect. The young messenger spoke again, even more urgently this time, and several warriors broke away from the main group entirely, wheeling their horses towards the northern trail, their hearts pulling them towards their endangered families. Ayana let them go without protest, his face betraying no emotion, but his jaw tightened perceptibly as he watched them disappear over the ridge, swallowed by the dust and the swirling storm clouds. "Time is running out," he said, turning back to face the Sterling family, his voice somber. "Every moment we delay here is another moment our people die. Another child falls victim to their cruelty." Clayton stepped forward, his pistol now holstered but his hands still trembling, his face a mask of anguish and regret. "Then go. Save your people. Consider my debt postponed. I will not run. I will face whatever consequences await me." "Postponed!" Ayana's laugh was bitter, a harsh sound that cut through the air like the winter wind. "You think justice can be delayed like a business meeting? You think the dead can wait for your convenience, for your legal loopholes and appeals? You think the pain of loss can be scheduled like a transaction?" "No," Clayton replied, his voice steadier now, a glimmer of resolve returning to his eyes. "I think a man who has the chance to save lives should take it, even if it means letting a guilty man go free. For now, I will carry the weight of my crimes knowing that I cheated justice, but I will not stand in the way of mercy." Magnolia watched this exchange with growing understanding, a sense of respect blossoming within her for both of these complex, flawed men. Her father wasn't trying to escape justice. He was offering to live with the unsettling weight of his crimes, knowing that Ayana's people needed their warriors more than they needed his blood. He was choosing the greater good, sacrificing his own immediate retribution for the chance to save innocent lives. But Ayana wasn't finished. He reached into a leather pouch at his belt and withdrew something that made Clayton take an involuntary step backward, his eyes widening in horror. It was a necklace, meticulously crafted from small, bleached bones and intricately woven beads, clearly the delicate work of careful, loving hands. "This belonged to my sister," Ayana said, holding the necklace up so that the weak morning light caught the intricate patterns, illuminating the artistry and the innocence it represented. "She was 8 years old when your hired men found our camp. She was making this for her doll when they shot her." The words hit Magnolia with the force of a physical blow, each syllable a sharp stab to her heart. She had imagined the victims of her father's crime as abstract figures, nameless casualties of his greed and ambition, but this necklace made them real, transforming them from statistics into individuals. She saw a little girl with clever fingers and artistic dreams, a child whose life had been brutally snuffed out for the sake of land that would never love Clayton the way she had loved her family. "I have carried this with me since I buried her," Ayana continued, his voice filled with a quiet sorrow. waiting for the chance to place it around the neck of the man responsible for her death, to make him understand the human cost of his actions. He stepped closer to Clayton, the necklace extended between them like a fragile bridge between two vastly different worlds, a symbol of the chasm of pain and misunderstanding that separated them. But your daughter showed me something I had forgotten, something I had almost lost in my quest for vengeance. She showed me that mercy can exist even in the hearts of the children of monsters, that redemption is possible, even for those who have committed the most unforgivable sins. Clayton's breath came in short, ragged gasps as he stared at the small, delicate bones, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the necklace. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and remorse. "I want you to wear this," Ayanna said simply, his voice unwavering. "Every day, for the rest of your life. I want you to feel the weight of those bones against your chest, a constant reminder of the innocent life you extinguished. When you wake up in the morning, when you eat your fine meals, when you count your money, I want you to remember that every luxury you enjoy, every comfort you take for granted was paid for with the life of an 8-year-old girl who will never grow up, who will never laugh, who will never experience the joys of womanhood." The courtyard fell silent except for the sighing of the wind and the distant thunder of more warriors departing towards the north, answering the desperate call to protect their families. Clayton reached out with shaking hands and took the necklace, his fingers closing around the tiny bones, his touch almost reverent. "And if I refuse?" he whispered, his eyes searching Ayanna's for any sign of compassion. Ayanna's eyes flickered to Magnolia, then back to her father. "Then your daughter's kindness was wasted, and I will hunt you down after I save my people. The peace offering you have offered will not be taken, and I will take what I came for," he said, his voice filled with malice. "But if you wear it and truly understand what it means, then perhaps some good can come from all this death. Perhaps something beautiful can grow from the ashes of tragedy. Perhaps you will finally learn what honor means." Clayton lifted the necklace over his head with hands that shook like autumn leaves, the bone settling against his chest with a chilling finality. As the beads hit his shirt, Magnolia saw something break inside him, some last vestige of the proud, ruthless man who had built an empire without counting the cost, some final shred of his former self crumbling away, leaving behind a hollow shell filled with grief and regret. More warriors were leaving now, the urgency of the northern crisis pulling them away from their quest for personal justice, their loyalty to their families outweighing their desire for vengeance. But Ayanna remained, watching Clayton Sterling transform into something smaller, more human, more broken than he had ever been before. "Will that be enough?" Magnolia asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her heart aching for the pain and loss that had consumed both sides of this conflict. Ayanna looked at Clayton Sterling, this broken man wearing the bones of a murdered child, and something ancient and tired seemed to settle in his eyes, a weariness born of centuries of injustice and unending cycles of violence. Around them, more warriors continued their exodus towards the north, until fewer than 30 remained in the courtyard, a small contingent guarding their leader and ensuring that his word was kept. "It will have to be enough," Ayanna said finally, his voice filled with a quiet resignation. "Because justice delayed for the living is infinitely more valuable than justice that comes too late for the dead. Our first priority is to protect our living. Vengeance can wait." He mounted his magnificent black stallion with fluid grace, despite his lingering wounds, and looked down at Magnolia one last time, his gaze filled with a mixture of respect and gratitude. "You saved more than my life when you gave me that bowl of soup," he said, his voice softer now. "You reminded me that hatred is a fire that consumes the one who carries it the longest, that mercy is a far more powerful weapon than vengeance." Clayton touched the necklace at his throat, his fingers tracing the small bones with something that might have been reverence, a desperate attempt to connect with the humanity he had so carelessly discarded in his relentless pursuit of wealth and power. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Now you live with what you've done," Ayanna replied, his tone somber. "Every sunrise, every meal, every comfortable night in your mansion, you remember her. You remember them all. And maybe, just maybe, you find a way to make their deaths mean something more than just your profit, to transform your legacy from one of destruction to one of healing. The remaining warriors were growing restless, their horses dancing with impatience to join their brothers racing towards the winter camps, their thoughts consumed by the safety of their families. Ayana raised his spear one final time, but this wasn't a gesture of threat, a symbol of impending violence. It was a salute, a silent acknowledgement of something neither side fully understood, but both recognized as necessary. A fragile truce, a tentative step towards peace, a fragile hope that something good could emerge from the ashes of so much pain and suffering. If our paths cross again, Clayton Sterling, they will not cross in anger, Ayana said, his voice echoing with quiet conviction. But they will cross in truth. The bones around your neck will see to that. With that, he wheeled his horse towards the north and galloped away, his remaining warriors following in a thunder of hoofbeats that gradually faded into the distance, leaving a profound silence in their wake. Within minutes, the Sterling mansion stood empty of everything except the wind, the settling dust, and the heavy weight of what had transpired. Father and daughter stood in silence for a long time. And so the dust settles not just on the courtyard of the Sterling mansion, but also on the raw edges of hatred and the potential for healing. This story, at its heart, is about the transformative power of kindness, the heavy burden of responsibility, and the courageous choice to seek understanding even in the face of unimaginable loss. It's a testament to the idea that even from the darkest depths of cruelty and injustice, a spark of hope can ignite, illuminating a path towards redemption and reconciliation. What did you take away from Magnolia's choice? What does honor mean to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, or any reflections this story sparked in you down in the comments below. Let's start a conversation. And if you enjoyed this exploration of difficult choices and the enduring power of human connection, please consider subscribing. That way you won't miss out on future stories that challenge, inspire, and hopefully leave you thinking long after the last word. Thanks for watching.